This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. From Microbe TV, this is TWiV, This Week in Virology, episode 719, recorded on February 11, 2021. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today from New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone.
All right, we're a week later. Is it any better, Daniel?
I am going to say yes. I'm going to say apparently I'm going to be on the news tonight at 7:30 after we finish TWiV, and I am going to say then, this will be dropped Saturday, so people won't know that I'm going to say that we've really come over a crest. I mean, we were looking at over 300,000 new cases a day. We crested over 5,000 deaths per day, and now we've dropped down to less than 200,000 cases per day. And our deaths are actually getting down in the 2000s again, which is, horrible to say that that's better than where we were.
And what's the reason for this downturn? Do we know?
I think there's several things going on, Vincent. I think one of them is that, if you become infected, when you're infecting 300,000 people a day, you're taking 300,000 people who are probably not going to get reinfected in the next 3-4 months or so. We're also ramping up vaccines. Over 1 million people are being vaccinated a day. The other thing is we got past Christmas, New Year's, we got past all those big holiday times. So, and I understand it was a really bad Super Bowl, so hopefully we won't see much of a surge after that. Okay, we've got a lot to cover today. And actually, I'm going to say exciting new news, hot off the press we'll talk about today. But let me start off with my quotation. And this is a quotation from The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, one of my favorite books. People may not know, but I live in East Egg, and I look across at West Egg, where Gatsby was when he... Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and then one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne ceaselessly into the past. Born back ceaselessly into the past. So, all right. Never miss an opportunity to vaccinate. Never miss an opportunity to test. Never waste a vaccine dose. I hope everyone survived last week's discussion of the variants. And yes, it was simplified. I left out the trimers and furin cleavage sites and pre and post fusion conformation changes. But my hope is that this primer will help as we go forward. I was thinking today as I went in and one of my patients had not made it through the night, how lucky we were when we talked about the Irish patient that we got to follow his drama through, not knowing how it was going to go, and then see him end up back home in Colorado. But unfortunately, that is not the outcome that all my patients are experiencing. All right, the pre-exposure period. So my stages paper is now published. It's out there. I don't know if the full, it's going to be open access. The full paper will be available soon. But we're going to stick with these stages, the pre-exposure period. So now 2 masks at a time are being recommended or discussed by the CDC. In the MMWR, there was maximizing fit for cloth and medical procedure masks to improve performance and reduce SARS-CoV-2 transmission and exposure, 2021 in the MMWR. Testing, I want to say I have growing concerns about the reduction in testing. I was looking at the COVID tracking project, and they had reported that there had been a significant drop in testing. I was able to confirm this in other sources. On January 18th, the 7-day average of daily new tests reached an all-time high of over 2 million. Just to kind of give people perspective, January 18th, 1/20 was the Biden inauguration. That number has now fallen well below that 2 million number. And that 2 million number is actually what our public health experts consider an important threshold for allowing us to identify most of the people with symptoms, really to prevent them from spreading it to other individuals. In New York, here locally, the 15th of January is when we reached our peak with 324,671 tests done in a single day. We're now seeing half that number, less than 200,000, really about 150,000 done per day. So we're really dropping. It was about a year ago that Michael Mina started championing the idea of the home saliva, rapid saliva test, the lick of sticks, $1 or less. He was a guest on TWiV back in TWiV 640 back in July. Now, there are several at-home collection COVID tests. Most of them are mail back-offs. They're not really doing the full thing. But back in December, Illum, this is an Australian-based company, received an EUA for their 15-minute rapid in-home antigen test. And recently, the White House announced that the Department of Defense has committed $230.8 million to help Illum increase its production of these at-home tests. As per the Illum CEO, Sean Parsons, we certainly would like to see this priced in the $30 range, but he admits it will definitely start at more than that. $30 per test, that's a lot of money. So really not quite where I would like to see it be. Active vaccination. I'm going to call this the good, the bad, and the ugly. The ugly is all the equity with access. The bad is we've really created a system that made access to vaccination very complicated, frustrating, and by its very nature, easier for wealthy, healthy, and more educated to access. The good, though, is that it does look like this is about to turn around and improve, at least for the U.S. I'm hoping the rest of the world after that. But the CDC has a COVID-19 vaccine data tracker. And actually, we're really seeing the number ramp up of vaccines per day. It's over 1 million per day. Here in New York, we are below average. We're bottom dwellers. We're in the bottom half. Alaska's doing the best. Nevada's doing the worst. Based upon percent of doses received and then being administered, we have places like North Dakota where 95% of the doses end up administered. In New York, we're down, only about 70% of the doses delivered are administered, about 30% of them. So about a third of them end up sitting in freezers. But we expect this to turn around soon. Just give people, it is February on the 26th. J&J is going to be going for EUA. And we are hoping that by April, the supply outstrips demand. Moderna has ramped up its production and deliveries. Pfizer has reported a doubling of its production per month by halving its production time through increased efficiencies. A nice story about that in USA Today this last week. I do want to share some concerning developments if people are not watching what's happening down in Manaus, Brazil. And this was a situation where the first wave of the virus ran rampant. Really, there was a decision made, and what ended up happening was it ran through. About 5 or 6% of the population died. It was mostly the older, the more vulnerable. By October 2020, there's a nice Lancet article on this called Resurgence of COVID-19 in Manaus, Brazil, despite high seroprevalence. And as they report in the Lancet, by October 2020, 76% of the population that was still alive was deemed previously infected based on serological testing. But now we're seeing an increase. We're seeing a second wave. This time, the hospitalization rate is 2.5 times what we saw with the first wave. We're seeing a 20% higher per day mortality than happened the first time. And the surge is so large that hospitals have run out of oxygen, and patients on ventilators who need extra oxygen to breathe are literally suffocating in hospital beds. So not much of an endorsement for this Great Barrington, let's try to achieve herd immunity with natural infection. I'm going to get to the next question. I'm still in the vaccine section. Does vaccination impact transmission? And we just this week, there was an update from the CDC where they actually do couch this, so I will comment, but they say vaccinated persons with an exposure to someone with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 are not required to quarantine if they meet the following criteria, right? So this is a change. if they're fully vaccinated, so they're past 2 weeks following the receipt of that second dose in a 2-dose series, but they're also kind of getting ready. They're saying, or greater than 2 weeks following receipt of 1 dose of a single-dose vaccine. I think they're thinking J&J might get approved. They're within 3 months of the receipt of the last dose in the series, and they're remaining asymptomatic. And that's up on the CDC website. And they actually, they couch this and they explain. They say, okay, although the risk of SARS-CoV-2 transmission from vaccinated persons to others is still uncertain, vaccination has been demonstrated to prevent symptomatic COVID-19. Symptomatic and pre-symptomatic transmission is thought to have a greater role in transmission than purely asymptomatic transmission. And additionally, individual and societal benefits of avoiding unnecessary quarantine may outweigh the potential but unknown risk of transmission and facilitate the direction of public health resources to persons at highest risk for transmitting SARS-CoV-2 to others. So this is a bit of a change. This is a bit of an update. I kept hearing about transmission evidence out of Israel. And on the 8th, the paper initial real-world evidence for lower viral load of individuals who have been vaccinated by BNT162b2 became available on GitHub. So 2 things. Well, the BNT162b2s, that's the Pfizer vaccine. And what is GitHub? This is actually interesting. This was a website originally set up for developers and companies to share and maintain software. I actually used it when I was writing one of our textbooks. It's sort of a way to share files, but sort of interesting, another way for things to just get out there. And what they reported here, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, because they report that there was a drop in the average CT values when they looked at people over a certain age with a 75% vaccination penetrance versus people at a lower age with a lower vaccination penetrance. But they actually should have, I think, called this statistically significant, because what they really came out to was instead of about a 26.5, they were seeing CT values of about 27.5. So only 1 CT value difference. So instead of an average RNA copy number of 800,000, they're seeing an RNA copy number of 400,000 on average. So still in a level where we think there's transmission. So I think this is a complicated issue. We'll learn more about it. All right, still in this pre-exposure period, we continue to recommend that people exercise. No reason to go into a COVID exposure, vitamin deficient. There actually was a paper in the Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology entitled Vitamin D and COVID-19, Why the Controversy? And I guess I'm along lines with this. I don't think anyone is going to propose that we do a study where you have half the group vitamin D deficient and the other replete. I think across the board, there is no reason to be vitamin D deficient. So I think that can just be closed. Take your vitamin D, don't be vitamin D deficient, exercise, don't put on extra pounds, those pandemic pounds, be careful, try to be as healthy as you can. Passive vaccination. This was exciting, another exciting week. Lillys bamlanivimab, administered with etesevimab, received FDA EUA for COVID-19. So this is now Eli Lilly has a cocktail as well, and it gets even more exciting. If you give just bamlanivimab, instead of an hour, you can infuse it over 16 minutes. If you do the cocktail, 21 minutes. So this is really going to improve access. As a treatment reminder, it's really critical that you get this in during the first 7 to 10 days. Was another study out there where really, if you give monoclonals late, if you wait till someone's already in the ICU till it's late in that second week, if you miss that front window, you don't do anyone any help. And we've been actually infusing a lot of people through the United in Research study, and this has been great to give people access to monoclonal therapy in the comfort of their own home through infusions. We get into our early inflammatory phase, and maybe just as a reminder, remdesivir still being used in hospitalized patients with oxygen saturations less than 94%, a little broader with regard to not limiting it based upon renal function. Steroids, again, second week, oxygen saturations less than 94. We discussed last time updated data on anticoagulation, a number of studies that were showing that in ICU, critically ill patients, that prophylactic dosing anticoagulation was associated with the best outcomes. But in your moderately ill floor patients, that full dose anticoagulation was associated with the best outcomes. But some exciting new news on Tosialisumab. I've been waiting for this for quite a while, actually. And this is the recovery data. So just put out on a preprint, Tocilizumab in patients admitted to hospital with COVID-19 recovery trial, preliminary results of a randomized controlled open label platform trial. And this is a preprint, but I got a chance to look through this. This study looked at over 4,000 adults, and the patients were allocated to receive Tocilizumab either as a single dose or a second dose. And actually, there's a weight-based adjustment. So as high as 800 milligrams or down to 400 milligrams based upon various weights. You can look up and, find the dose for your patient. But a lot of times people use this flat 400. This was an adjusted, just like in REMCAP. Patients allocated to Tocilizumab were more likely to be discharged from the hospital alive within 28 days. So 54% versus 47%. With a rate ratio of 1.23, p-value of 0.0001. Among those not receiving invasive mechanical ventilation, less likely to end up on a mechanical ventilator or die, so 33 versus 38. And again, p-value of 0.0005. So let me translate this. These patients had a background of steroids, and if Toci was given with a background of steroids, there was a 14% reduction in 28-day mortality with a p-value of less than 0.007, and almost a 20% reduction in the risk of requiring intubation with a p-value of 0.01. So this builds on the REMCAP data, starting to get a sense of when and in what context and how to use Toci in a manner that is associated with, I think, really clear, well-designed trial data supporting a mortality benefit as well as a better outcome, not ending up on a mechanical ventilator. Secondary infection phase. I always tell people, remember your fungal and your bacterial infections. This is a later part of the disease. Most people coming in are not infected, but there was another nice article in Open Form Infectious Disease, bacterial superinfections among persons with coronavirus disease. 2019, a comprehensive review of data from post-mortem studies. So these are people who ended up dying, right? So it's not just looking at everyone, it's looking at the people that actually died from COVID-19. And I think interesting here is which pathogens did you see people die from? So Acinetobacter baumannii, Staphylococcus aureus, right? I think we've talked about that before, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and Klebsiella pneumoniae. So lung superinfections were the causes of death in about 16%. And so we're seeing these infections, but remember, we're also seeing some fungal infections, seeing a few cryptococcal infections, just sort of to remember it's not just Aspergillus and Candidemia. Also want to put a plug in here for TWiP. After we record this, we're going to record TWiP, and we're going to have our mystery case. And I don't want to give away the answer, but I may say that this may be a situation where ivermectin saves the day. So just a teaser, listen to This Week in Parasitism. Okay, the multisystem inflammatory phase. This is a reminder, and we keep seeing this a couple times today. People are being clapped out of the hospital. This is a bimodal disease. People come in during that early inflammatory phase. We treat them. They're often doing better. But remember, 10 to 15% of those folks are either going to die in the next 30 days or get readmitted. So a lot of times they get better, and then they have this second late inflammatory, this multi-system inflammatory phase. And so don't just clap them out. Make sure they have good close follow-up, and make sure you're ready to jump in at that point as well. The tail phase, this sort of actually overlaps the post-hospital plan. So we want to be thinking about what the appropriate anticoagulation recommendations will be. And actually, we're going to meet at ASH and try to come up with some evidence-based guidance there based upon what people are doing, what the studies are. But I also want to talk a little bit about treatment here. I still find it frustrating. I'm sure a lot of our listeners who have long COVID find it frustrating that we still don't have a lot of really good data-driven interventions to help with long COVID. We take care of a lot of COVID patients, long COVID patients here in New York at ProHealth, but we're trying to consolidate our COVID care actually so we can really learn from each other, learn from patients. So, I think one of the big things I just want to throw in here before we close is that people who have long COVID, who are having problems exercising, have problems going upstairs, there's a subset that has a significant post-exertional malaise issue. These aren't people who can just buck up and gradually increase their exercise. These are people who, need to be treated differently. So you really want to screen for that in your guidance of what these people are going to be doing. So let me close with our fundraiser before we hit emails. And I want to say thank you, everyone who's already gone to parasiteswithoutborders.com and started to contribute, because through the months of February and March, donations made to Parasites Without Borders will be matched and doubled by TWiV and donated to the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, including scholarships for their annual meeting travel awards. And I'm going to focus on that. We are going to try to raise money and bring women, early career women from low-income parts of the world to the annual American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene meeting, really help them, invest in these young women. And hopefully, instead of 15% of the leadership in so much of science being old white men, we can actually increase the diversity and the opportunities. So help us do that. Help us make a difference.
Our first email is from Dagfinn, who's writing from Oslo, Norway, where it's -9 Celsius. A question regarding a group of patients frequently overlooked, drug-addicted patients who Dagfinn works with. According to their national service there in Norway, for not a single case among these patients have been reported, and he sees similar reports from other countries. Do you have any idea why this group of patients, who are usually very susceptible to infection, seems to be nearly unaffected by SARS-CoV-2 virus?
Yeah, I have to say that is an interesting observation. And though I haven't seen a lot of data here, it actually goes along with my experience. We as infectious disease physicians interact with and take care of a lot of intravenous drug users, develop a lot of bloodstream infections, endocarditis, things like that. Unfortunately, what we have seen in the United States is a significant increase in the amount of drug abuse, deaths due to drug-associated overdoses. But no, my experience has actually been in lysis. We are not seeing a lot of those individuals. I don't know if it's a younger demographic. You would think that their comorbidities and the other problems would put them at higher risk for COVID. But no, that actually is in line and very interesting observation.
Laura writes, are there any data about different vaccines' ability to prevent long COVID? Laura is in vaccine priority group 2. Seems likely by the time she's vaccinated, multiple vaccines will be given EUAs. The messaging I've heard in the news is if you're offered a vaccine, take it. However, I'm fortunate to be in a demographic where hospitalization and death are extremely unlikely. So my primary concern has been long COVID as a healthy 40-year-old woman with autoimmune disease. Since studies have shown that even a relatively mild case of COVID can lead to long COVID, it seems to me I would want to choose the vaccine that has the highest efficacy of preventing disease of any severity.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, right? And I think you could sort of do the math on this. You could say, okay, so let's take the mRNA vaccines, 95% reduction in symptomatic disease. We're not really seeing long COVID in people who suddenly develop symptoms and then find out through serology they were asymptomatically infected. Clearly, the majority, if not all, of people who develop long COVID had some degree of symptomatic COVID. It isn't necessarily that you need to be severe enough to be in the hospital. So preventing severe disease is not necessarily enough. Preventing symptomatic disease seems to be something we want to do. We are hoping that people who've been vaccinated are less likely to develop long COVID. And I was actually speaking to one of my colleagues today, Fatima Johari. people who have gotten even a single dose of vaccine, when they get COVID, and this unfortunately has happened, they tend to do quite well. So I'm very optimistic that the vaccines across the board are going to reduce the risk of long COVID. But at this point, we don't know, and we're still going to keep an eye on this. Millions of people are being vaccinated, but I see your point. The J&J, what if we say, oh, it's less effective at preventing mild disease? Are those people with mild disease who got a J&J vaccine, are they going to be at a significant risk of going on to long COVID? We certainly don't know. But that, I think, is an important thing for us to keep an eye on.
Aviva wants to know about Passover coming up in a month and a half. They will have 6 adults and 3 kids. The adults will all be vaccinated, the kids not. And they want to know, is it safe? We can test the kids. We can keep them home from school. We can test them again. There's a debate in this family as to whether this is safe to do. We value your input.
Okay. No, I mean, I am going to have the same situation. I don't know if people notice, but or know this, but I will be celebrating Passover. The current plan is my dad's birthday corresponds with the first Seder, the first night. And so our plan, my mother is going to be fully vaccinated. My father will be fully vaccinated. I will be fully vaccinated. And then my wife, myself, and our children. So that's going to be 7 of us together. I will recommend that everyone gets tested, preferably, the morning, right? It's going to be a Saturday is the first night, I believe. Hopefully I got that right. Everyone get tested before. My parents, I actually say, hey, they've been vaccinated. I'm not particularly worried about them. It's more the risk. My wife is not going to be vaccinated by then. My children will not be vaccinated by then. I think this is one of the things. Once people have been vaccinated, you don't want to undersell and say you can't change things. I actually think that a year ago, when my parents were not vaccinated, we did not have Passover with them. This year, with them being vaccinated, I actually think we're going to go ahead, and I think that is a reasonable risk, but nothing's 100% safe. So you want to consider all this. If my wife, for instance, had health issues, she had, problems with her immune system, I might rethink that. So you want to make this an individual decision for everyone.
One more from Eugene in Atlanta. What are your thoughts on getting the mRNA vaccine for people being immunosuppressed with diseases such as Crohn and treated with drugs like Stelara? I would imagine not to miss the opportunity of getting the vaccine, then perhaps resuming the drugs sometime after the second vaccine dose.
Yeah, that is routinely what we're doing. We're still recommending the vaccination. We're not sure that it will be as effective in these individuals as it would be in someone who has an intact immune system who's not an immunosuppressant. And this might actually be the population as communicating with one of the oncologists today, patients who are on certain drugs that interfere with B cell and other immune function. This might be a situation where you actually do one of these semi-quantitative anti-spike serology tests. But no, we're recommending that people get vaccinated. We're just a little concerned they may not get as robust a protection.
That's COVID-19 clinical update number 49 with Dr. Daniel Griffin. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you so much. And everyone, be safe. It's so close to the spring. We're going to make it.